Hello, how you doing? Se você já me acompanha há mais tempo, nas redes sociais, nos meus cursos e tudo, você já com certeza sabe que a melhor forma de você adquirir um novo idioma, adquirir o idioma inglês, é escutando, lendo e repetindo esse processo. Eu já falei muito sobre a importância da escuta compreensível, ou seja, você escolher materiais que você sabe do que se trata, que você entende em português na sua cabeça o que você está ouvindo. Quando eu digo assim em português, é porque quando a gente está começando, todos os nossos pensamentos, tudo em português, certo? Então é muito importante que você entenda, se você já tem um nível maior, melhor de inglês, não precisa, mas se você está bem no nível iniciante, pegue e traduza tudo que você vai ouvir. Não se arrisque a ouvir algo que você nunca ouviu na vida. Enfim, este é um ponto. O segundo ponto é que a gente vive na era de vídeos, né? A gente vive na era do vídeo instantâneo e as pessoas, aquelas, digamos assim, mais curiosas e que se aprofundam nos assuntos, usam muito o áudio. Usam os podcasts, não é verdade? Fica no áudio. E a melhor atividade que você pode fazer para treinar, quando você não souber mais o que... não sei o que eu vou fazer hoje para treinar inglês. Listen to something in English. Mas de uma forma onde você possa ler e escutar. Então, o que eu venho fazendo? Eu venho transformando os meus áudios em um vídeo onde eu não vou colocar imagem nenhuma, mas você pode ler no vídeo o que você está escutando. Já que você não vai pegar um papel ou um PDF e ficar olhando, então eu estou colocando a legenda do que eu estou falando em inglês ou do que a pessoa, do áudio que está acontecendo em inglês na tela. Ainda assim, neste áudio, você vai poder baixar o PDF com o script desta fala. Na verdade, deixa eu falar rapidinho, isso aqui é uma gravação que eu fiz já há alguns anos, inclusive há muitos anos, porque eu estava escutando agora recentemente e eu digo que Belo Horizonte is the third largest city in Brazil. A terceira maior cidade do Brasil? Acho que não é mais. Enfim, tem algumas diferenças aí de informação. Mas eu gravei esse podcast há muitos anos, quando eu comecei a distribuir áudios em inglês para as pessoas na internet. Ok? Então, eu regravei, ou seja, eu refiz este áudio e agora você pode ouvi-lo, ler a legenda no vídeo, baixar o PDF e também, junto com este PDF, vai ter a tradução. Então, se você está bem no começo, leia a tradução, em seguida você escuta. Se você quiser arriscar logo em escutar e ler, no problem. Se você sentir que teve dificuldade, você leia a tradução, aprenda o texto e escute de novo. Alright? Uma coisa interessante, que aí é uma opinião própria, minha, é incrível que quando eu escuto eu falando, esse não é mais o jeito que eu falo hoje em inglês. É interessante para ver como que eu evoluí. O jeito que eu falava em inglês nessa época é diferente do jeito que eu falo inglês hoje. Um sinal para você de que é sempre uma coisa que a gente chama em inglês de ongoing process. É um processo contínuo de evolução e aprendizagem para sempre. Aprendizado para sempre. Alright? Então era esse recado que eu queria dar para você. Aproveite. Você também... Eu vou deixar aqui um link onde você pode não só acessar essa aula, baixar o PDF e também baixar o áudio MP3, caso você queira colocar aí numa playlist sua. Alright? Além disso, você pode escutar este áudio no meu podcast, no Spotify ou qualquer outro aplicativo de podcast. Basta você buscar Agora Eu Falo Inglês, você vai achar esse podcast lá também. Vou deixar tudo aqui no link, é mais fácil. Lembrando, clique no link que eu vou deixar aqui embaixo para você baixar este material. Alright? Enjoy. Aproveite. See you soon. Bye now.
Welcome to the Agora Follow podcast, where you learn English in a way you'll never forget. And now, your host, the craziest English teacher from Brazil, Leonardo Leite.
As all of you already know, I am Leonardo Leite, and I was born in Belo Horizonte. It's the third largest city in Brazil, right? And ever since I was about 8 years old, I've always wanted to, I've always dreamed of speaking a different language. I've always been fascinated by other people speaking a different language, not only English, but I thought it was amazing. I thought it was something amazing. When I watched a movie or, when I saw somebody, a foreigner here in Brazil speaking a different language, that always fascinated me. And when I was 8 years old, I really asked my mom and dad to put me in an English school. So that didn't happen when I was 8. Probably, I don't know why. Probably they couldn't afford a private English school for me. But when I was about 11 years old, I started going to an English school here in Belo. And I used to go 2 or 3 times, I think it was 3 times a week. And it was very early. It was about 7 or 7:30 in the morning. And so I started going to this English class with lots of students and a very nice English teacher. I can't remember her name. It was a woman, and she used slides, but she didn't use, electronic slides or anything, digital slides or anything. She used real slides, with the projector slides, and so I started going to this course, and I started learning a little. It was very interesting because it was a very traditional English school here in Belo, and she always taught us English by phrases. That's funny, isn't it? But it was always phrases, and we learned the phrases of a certain story. So she would tell me the story, and then I would have to repeat all the sentences of the dialogues. And I remember one of the first sentences that I learned when I was 12 years old, 11 to 12 years old. It was, have a cup of coffee, Bill. Have a cup of coffee, Bill. It was a story, and Bill, came to somebody's house, and the host said, "Oh, have a cup of coffee, Bill." And I learned it, and I could never forget that sentence. Have a cup of coffee, Bill. The problem was, I never found a situation in which I could use that sentence, I could say, "Oh, have a cup of coffee, my friend," but I never used that sentence. Anyway, I kept on going, and I went from book 1 to book 2, 3, 4. And by the time I was 15, after 3 or 4 years going to the same school, I was already advanced. Normally, in my time, the courses would take approximately 8 years. And I was, halfway through. I had been learning. I had been going there for about 4 years. I thought of myself as a very good student, and I thought I knew a lot. And then I continued studying. I changed schools. I changed tutors. I had different English teachers. I started having private English lessons because I really wanted to go abroad. My dream was to live abroad. And there was this program, this international exchange program by Rotary. And my father, got me into this program. And I really started to study because they had some English tests. I had to take a test. They had to test my English to see if I could at least survive in the United States. And the program was to the United States. There were some options to go to other places, but most of the kids, they went to the United States. So and before that, now I remember. I remember. So I was going to the United States, right? But before that, I had the opportunity to go to Europe. My sister was living in London. This was in 1991. Okay, I was 17 years old. Okay, and then I went to London, and when I got to London, I was alone. Okay, I went to visit my sister. My sister was there waiting for me, but I was all alone and 17 years old. Okay, so anyway, and when I arrived there, I was very frustrated, because after having gone to English schools for almost 8 years, and all the other English teachers here, they figured me out as, they saw me as an advanced student. I couldn't understand anything that the British people said. And I was very frustrated. I was very sad. Because I thought to myself, I studied all these years, and I could express myself. I could say what I wanted, where I wanted to go with no problem, what I wanted to buy. I could say everything I wanted, but I couldn't interact. I couldn't understand immediately, automatically, what other people there said, what they spoke. I couldn't understand. So I came back to Brazil very frustrated. And that was before I moved to the United States. So I had about 6 months to practice my English before I went to the United States. And that was from January 1992 until August 1992. So I had this time to practice my English. So I started practicing with English teachers, blah, 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 blah. But all we had at that time was traditional English schools with books, grammar, a lot of grammar. I learned everything you can imagine about grammar. Simple present, simple past, present perfect, past perfect, conditional perfect, subjunctive, and everything. So I went to the United States in August. And the first time I went there, I stayed there for about 14 months. That's 1 year plus 2 months. Okay? And when I started living there, when I arrived there, it was the same problem I had when I went to London 6 months before. So when I arrived in the United States, I was a little smarter because I had already had the experience of going to another country, going abroad. So I studied phrases. Now I teach you phrases, remember that? So I started, learning and memorizing some very important phrases that I knew I would use. I knew I would have to say those sentences because I knew they were going to ask me about, how my trip was, where I was from, how many brothers and sisters I had, right? About my mom's job, my dad's job, and what Brazil is like, talk to them about Brazil, give them descriptions about our cities and everything else about our country. So I memorized some very important phrases. So when I arrived there, people were impressed with my English because I knew the phrases, So when they asked me, I had the phrase ready to go. That's interesting, isn't it? Anyway, so I stayed there this first time for about 14 months. In these 14 months, I went to school, I made some friends, and I improved my English. But this time, I started noticing, observing how I learned, How did I learn that? How did I learn this? So, for example, lots of people ask me about the present perfect. I remember the day I realized exactly how these, goddamn present perfect worked. And it wasn't studying. the grammar structure. It was by understanding and observing how people used it all the time. Anyway, let's make this gigantic, long story shorter. When I came back to Brazil, and I also had the opportunity to go back to the United States for one more year to study in college. So I had to come back to Brazil, stay here for about 6 months, and then I went back. In these 6 months here in Brazil, I wanted to make money. And I was already from 18 to 19 years old, and I wanted to teach English. So I got a job at an English school. And when I got into this English school, they started teaching me how to teach using their method. And their method was with books, grammar, blah, 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 blah. Okay? But it was actually a very good school with very interesting techniques that I still use with you nowadays. And so I started teaching students here in Brazil. And I didn't go back to the United States after 6 months. I stayed in Brazil for one more year. So I got a lot of experience, teaching for 1 year here in Brazil with the 18, 19 years old. And then I realized that most of my students, they were very happy with me. They were very happy with the way I was teaching them. But I was using the English school's method. And I realized that they couldn't really speak fluently. They couldn't really understand everything automatically. After that, I had this idea. I went back to the United States, and I took courses on how to teach English to foreign speakers. Okay? And I stayed there for almost 2 years, and I came back. When I came back to Brazil, and then I started teaching English like crazy. I was one of the best teachers here in Belo Horizonte, okay? And I had lots of students. I had over 2,000 students in classroom, all right? Anyway, when I was, after 20 years teaching English, okay? Until about 10 years ago, I realized that the way I was teaching English here in Brazil wasn't working. The way I was using the methods of books and grammar and writing, doing some written exercises wasn't working. The students were getting frustrated when they went abroad too. And that's when I had this insight, and I said, oh my God, 20 years teaching English, and my students are not getting the results that they wanted. So it was then that I decided to start Agora Eu Falo. I decided to teach English exactly the way I learned, okay, with my experience. So I gave up on all the books, I gave up on all the grammar methods and structures, and I decided to help the people who wanted to speak and listen. Speak and listen the way I learned, because I had the experience, So, and this is the result of two frustrations I had in life. One as a student, and another one as a teacher. So the way you are going to learn English with me now is the way, it's the closest way that I learned. Okay? So everything I will teach you, everything I teach you will be from my experience. All right? So, that's, making the very long story a little shorter. That's it. And about 8 years ago, I started Agora Eu Falo. And from now on, I've got over 20,000 2,000 students. So imagine, 20 years teaching English, I have 2,000. 8 years, I have 20,000, right? So this is a little bit of my story, my journey on how I learned my English. I told you in English, right? Now I want to hear from you what you thought of this story.